They said it was madness, that a woman, a widow, would never survive the 11 Seoul 0-pound ice buffalo. The biting wind of Yakutia howled, but the hungry cry of the village was even louder in Anya's heart. Her eyes, once tear-filled from the pain of loss, now burned with ancestral determination. The cracks in the ice beneath her feet seemed to echo the despair that pushed her forward towards the legendary beast that was her people's last hope. And what she would face would forever change the legend of Yakut resilience. The biting wind of Yakutia howled, but the hungry cry of the village was even louder in Anya's heart. Her eyes, once tear-filled from the pain of loss, now burned with ancestral determination. The cracks in the ice beneath her feet seemed to echo the despair that pushed her forward towards the legendary beast that was her people's last hope. And what she would face would forever change the legend of Yakut resilience. Anya took her first steps, each one sinking into the virgin snow, a muffled sound lost in the white immensity. The icy air burned her lungs with each breath, and the vapor escaping her mouth froze into tiny crystals on the edges of her fur hood. She felt the weight of her village's gaze on her back, not just curiosity, but hope, and for some, disbelief. The elders' words, "A woman cannot do this," echoed in her mind, but they were muffled by the image of her children's thin faces, Mikhail and Lena, and of the neighbors who were wasting away. That was her true burden, heavier than any pack, colder than the wind whipping her face, days stretched into a monotonous tapestry of white and grey. Anya walked tirelessly, her feet accustomed to the icy vastness, but her heart still heavy with the absence of her husband. She remembered how he had taught her to read the signs in the snow, to follow almost invisible tracks, to feel the change in the wind before a storm arrived. Now she used that wisdom, not to accompany him, but to replace him, a task tradition said was impossible for a woman. With each step, she felt a pang of grief, but also a growing strength, as if his spirit guided her. Blinding blizzards arose without warning, transforming the landscape into an indistinct blur. Anya had to stop, dig an improvised shelter in the snow, and wait, huddled, feeling the cold penetrate her thickest clothes. In these moments of isolation, doubt crept in. Was she strong enough? A solitary tear ran down her cheek, freezing before it reached her chin, an icy reminder of her vulnerability. But then the image of Lena's hungry eyes appeared, and determination returned, stronger than the cold. She could not fail. The treacherous ice was another silent enemy. In certain areas, the frozen ground became a slippery trap, and Anya needed all her concentration not to fall, not to break a bone that would doom her. She moved with the caution of a wild animal, testing each step, observing the nuances of the surface. Her intuition, sharpened by years of life on the tundra, was her most reliable guide. She knew the ice buffalo would not be easy to find. It was a creature of legends, and legends do not reveal themselves easily. At the end of the third day, exhausted, Anya spotted something. A dark smudge against the infinite white, distant, almost imperceptible. Her heart leaped. It was a sign, an indication that she was on the right path. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of hope and reverent fear. The ice buffalo, the creature that defied logic and survival, was there, somewhere in that vastness. Anya pressed her lips together, a gesture of pure resolve, and continued her journey, every fiber of her being focused on the approaching challenge. Anya pressed her lips together, a gesture of pure resolve, and continued her journey, every fiber of her being focused on the approaching challenge. The dark smudge she had spotted seemed to grow slowly on the horizon, a promise or a mirage in the white vastness. Each step was a battle against the weariness that weighed on her shoulders and the doubt that tried to creep into her mind. She remembered her husband's strong hands, the way he held his bow, and felt a pang of longing, But longing could not be a burden now. It needed to be a force that propelled her. As she drew closer, the dark smudge took shape, a small grove of twisted larches, an oasis amidst the ice. Among the trees, something even larger. A track, not a common track, but deep furrows in the snow, with footprints that looked like shallow craters. Anya's heart pounded, a strong drumming against her ribs. It was him, the ice buffalo. The legendary creature had passed through there a few hours, perhaps minutes ago. She crouched, touching the snow with her thick gloves, feeling the cold penetrate her skin. The edges of the footprints were sharp, indicating a recent passage. A wave of adrenaline coursed through her body, chasing away weariness for an instant. But soon, fear mingled with excitement. That animal was colossal, its presence almost palpable in the thin air. Ancestral wisdom whispered in her mind, "Respect the force of nature, but do not fear what it can offer." Anya followed the tracks, entering the small grove. The larches offered temporary protection against the biting wind, but also reduced visibility. She moved with the stealth of an experienced hunter, though she had never hunted an animal of such size alone. Her eyes scanned every shadow, every movement. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the crunch of snow beneath her feet and her own ragged breath. She thought of Mikhail, her eldest son, who dreamed of being a hunter like his father. She was forging a path for him, a legacy of courage that went beyond expectations. Suddenly, a deep, grave sound echoed through the forest, making the ground vibrate beneath her feet. A roar, not a roar of anger, but a primordial sound of a creature in its habitat, announcing its presence. Anya stopped, her body tense, the bow in her hands. She slowly raised her head, her eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. Through the icy mist that hung between the trees, she saw it. A dark, imposing mass, covered in thick, snow-white fur, with horns that curved like ancient branches. The ice buffalo. It was larger than anything she could have imagined, a mountain of flesh and bone, exhaling vapor from its nostrils in dense clouds. Its eyes, small and penetrating, seemed to observe the world with ancient indifference. Anya felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't just fear, but reverence, admiration for the creature's magnificence. She knew this would not be an ordinary kill. It would be a test of her very essence, of everything she represented for her village. She hid behind a larch, observing the beast. The buffalo was grazing calmly, tearing moss and lichens from the frozen ground. It was a moment of apparent peace, a calm before the storm. Anya knew she needed a plan, more than brute force. She needed intelligence, patience, and all the ancestral wisdom. Her fingers tightened on the bow. The fight for her village's survival was about to begin. She took a deep breath, the icy air filling her lungs with renewed and unwavering determination. Anya took a deep breath, the icy air filling her lungs with renewed and unwavering determination. The ice buffalo, a living mountain of muscle and fur, continued to graze, oblivious to the small figure hidden among the larches. Its horns, thick and curved, looked like crowns of ice, and each movement of its head was slow, heavy, but charged with a primordial force. Anya knew she couldn't confront it directly. Her people's wisdom, passed down from generation to generation, spoke of the hunter's patience, the cunning that overcame brute force. Her husband, in his stories, always emphasized that nature offered lessons, and the greatest of them was observation. She spent the next hours studying the animal. She noticed that despite its imposing size, the buffalo had a rhythm, a routine. It grazed in slow circles, moving with a dignity that almost made her hesitate. But then, the image of Lena and Mikhail's hungry eyes and the silent despair of her village rekindled the fire in her chest. There was no room for hesitation. This was her people's destiny, and she was the only one who could change it. Her fingers, though gloved, felt the cold texture of the bow's wood, an object that was once an extension of her husband's body, and now was hers. Anya noticed that as the buffalo moved, it left tracks not only in the snow, but also on small elevations in the terrain, creating paths that over time became more slippery due to compacted ice. An idea began to form in her mind, a strategy that would not involve force, but rather the very nature of the environment. She remembered her grandfather, who told stories about how the ancient Yakuts used ice and snow to their advantage, transforming danger into opportunity. It wasn't about fighting the beast, but about guiding it. With night approaching and temperatures dropping even further, Anya knew she had to act. The extreme cold was both her ally and her enemy. She began to move not towards the buffalo, but around it in a wide, careful circle. Her feet made as little noise as possible in the snow. She looked for strategic points, small inclines, ice-covered rocks, anything that could be used. The wind, which was once a torment, now seemed to whisper secrets, indicating the most favorable directions for her maneuver. She found the perfect spot, a gentle slope that ended in a depression covered by a thick layer of ice, formed by accumulated snow and repeated melting and freezing. It was a treacherous spot, where the ice was thinner and the surface smoother. Her plan was simple but risky, to guide the buffalo to that spot. She would need patience and impeccable precision. Her heart pounded, but it was no longer paralyzing fear, but the adrenaline of the huntress. Anya began to make small noises, snapping dry branches, scraping her boots on the snow, always maintaining a safe distance. The buffalo at first ignored her, but with Anya's persistence, it raised its head, its small, dark eyes fixed in the direction of the sounds. It didn't seem irritated, but curious, perhaps a little wary. Anya continued, moving slowly, attracting the creature's attention, one step at a time. She felt the weight of responsibility, the future of her village, hanging on each of her calculated movements. The buffalo, with its imposing mass, began to move, following the sounds, but without haste, with the slowness of a giant. Anya felt her heart in her throat, but remained calm. She was leading it, like a shepherd guides his flock. But this was a flock of a single animal, and the shepherd was a widow defying the impossible. She led it towards the slippery slope, each step a silent triumph. The air was heavy with tension, and the cold seemed to tighten even more. Finally, the buffalo was on the slope. Its hooves, made for snow and ice, began to slip. It tried to steady itself, but the surface was treacherous. Anya watched, her breath held. The colossal creature struggled to maintain its balance, its muscles tense, its body swaying dangerously. It was a spectacle of strength and vulnerability. She knew this was the moment, not to attack, but to use intelligence. Anya ran to a higher point, where the ground was firm. From there, she picked up a stone and threw it forcefully, not at the buffalo, but at the ice just ahead of it. The sound of the impact, dry and cracking, startled the animal. It tried to retreat, but its hooves slipped even further. With a dull thud, the buffalo fell, not violently but awkwardly, rolling into the depression. It was immobilized, not injured but trapped. Anya felt her legs tremble, a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The first part of her plan had worked. The village would have food. Anya felt her legs tremble, a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The ice buffalo was there, immobilized, not injured, but trapped. The first part of her plan had worked. The village would have food. But the monumental task was far from over. She approached cautiously, her heart pounding, observing the colossal creature. Its small, deep eyes gazed at her, not with fury, but with an almost melancholic resignation. It was nature bowing to necessity, life yielding so that other lives could flourish. Anya felt a pang of sadness, a deep respect for the beast's spirit. She knew what needed to be done. Her husband, in his teachings, always spoke of the honor in hunting, of how each life taken was a sacred sacrifice. With steady hands, Anya drew her hunting knife, sharpened by years of use and care. There was no explicit violence, just a precise and swift movement, guided by ancestral wisdom that saw death as part of the cycle of life, essential for survival. The buffalo let out a final breath, a warm vapor that dissolved into the icy air, and its massive body relaxed into the snow. Anya closed her eyes for an instant, a silent prayer on her lips for the animal's spirit, thanking it for its sacrifice. From that moment, the intense cold, which was once an enemy, became an ally. The buffalo's body, with its 11,000 pounds, would begin to freeze quickly, making transport an even more arduous task, but also preserving the meat. Anya knew she couldn't drag the entire animal at once. The legend of dragging the massive body spoke of the grandeur of the feat, but reality demanded intelligence. She began to work with the knife, separating the heaviest parts, but maintaining the body's integrity as much as possible, as if dismembering a mountain. Each cut was a Herculean effort, her muscles protesting, but the image of Mikhail and Lena, their faces pale with hunger, was an unwavering driving force. Hours dragged on, and the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Anya was covered in sweat despite the biting cold. Her hands were numb, but she didn't stop. She used animal hides she carried to wrap the larger parts, transforming them into packages that, though heavy, would be easier to handle. With each piece she prepared, she thought of the feast the village would have, of the strength the meat would bring to weakened bodies. It wasn't just food, it was hope, it was life. The challenge of dragging the massive body, or what remained of it in gigantic portions, began. Anya had brought with her a rudimentary sled made of birchwood and tied with reindeer leather, which now seemed minuscule compared to the task. She used thick ropes, skillfully tying them to the sled and the most substantial parts of the buffalo. The first pull was almost impossible. Her feet sank into the snow, and she felt her spine crack. But she didn't give up. With the strength of her spirit and the memory of her husband, who had taught her never to underestimate her own resilience, she pulled again. Slowly, inch by inch, the sled began to move. It was agonizingly slow progress, but it was progress. The sound of the sled scraping on the frozen snow was the melody of her victory, a song of hope she carried back to her village. The icy wind whipped her face, but she didn't feel the cold, only the warmth of determination. She looked back at the mountain of meat moving with her, and at the vast, unforgiving Yakutia. The journey back would be as challenging as the hunt, but Anya knew she wasn't alone. She carried the strength of her people, the memory of her love, and the promise of a future. Each pull was a prayer, each step an affirmation that the impossible could be overcome. Anya felt every fiber of her body scream in protest, but the image of her children's hungry eyes was a balm for the pain, a strength that overcame weariness. The sled, laden with the gigantic portions of the ice buffalo, seemed to weigh double with each meter. The snow, once a treacherous surface, was now a relentless obstacle, clinging to the wooden runners and demanding monumental effort with each pull. The sun, already low on the horizon, cast long shadows that danced like ghosts around her, and the approaching night's cold promised to be even more biting. In the village, hope was a flickering flame almost extinguished. Mikhail, Anya's eldest son, barely 10 winters old, sat near the fire that barely warmed the tent. His eyes, once full of childish vivacity, now carried the weight of worry. He looked at his younger sister Lena, who slept huddled, her face thin and pale. The elder's murmurs about Anya's madness echoed in his mind. He wanted to believe in his mother, wanted her to return with the promise of abundance, but the reality of Yakutia was cruel and unforgiving. Old Yana, the wisest in the village, watched Mikhail with a compassionate gaze. She remembered Anya's youth, her silent strength, her connection to the land. "Your mother is like the Lena River in the thaw, my young one," she said, her voice hoarse. "She seems calm, but she carries a strength that can move mountains." Mikhail merely nodded, not truly understanding, but the elder's soft voice brought a small comfort to his troubled heart. He wondered if his mother was cold, if she was safe, if she would succeed. Far away, Anya continued her odyssey. The wind howled, bringing with it snowflakes that whipped her face, but she barely felt them. Her mind was focused on a single goal, the village. She remembered her grandfather's stories, which spoke of the importance of leaving a trail of hope, even on the most difficult paths. Each pull on the sled was an act of faith, a brick in the rebuilding of her people's trust. She felt the skin of her hands crack beneath her gloves, but the physical pain was secondary to the urgency of her mission. She stopped for a brief moment, just to drink some icy water and eat a piece of dried meat. Her muscles trembled, and her body begged for rest, but time was a luxury she couldn't afford. The buffalo's body, though frozen, needed to be transported before nocturnal predators were attracted by the scent. She looked up at the starry sky, where the aurora borealis began to dance in greenish hues, a celestial tapestry that seemed to bless her effort. It was a reminder of Yakutia's untamed beauty and of her own inner strength. Anya thought of the women in her village, of the mothers who struggled to feed their children, of the widows who, like her, faced the pain of loss and the uncertainty of the future. She wasn't just carrying meat, she was carrying proof that resilience had no gender, that courage could flourish even in the most wounded heart. Her lips curved into a tired but determined smile. She wasn't just Anya, the widow, she was Anya, the hunter, the protector, the hope. With renewed vigor, she grabbed the ropes again. The sled groaned and Anya pulled, feeling the ancestral strength of her people flow through her veins. She knew the journey back would be a test of her will, a challenge that would demand every ounce of her strength, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Her husband's spirit, the love for her children, the hope of her village, all of it propelled her. Each step was a victory, each meter covered a promise fulfilled. She was the bridge between hunger and abundance, between despair and renewal. And, with each pull, she rewrote not only her own story, but that of all her suffering people. Anya continued to pull, the sound of the sled scraping on the snow becoming a hypnotic rhythm amidst the icy silence of the night. The aurora borealis, now more intense, cast a supernatural glow over the landscape, transforming the white into an ethereal blue-green. But the beauty did not lessen the difficulty. Exhaustion was a dense fog in her mind, and her eyes burned. She trusted her intuition, the signs of the land her husband and grandfather had taught her to read. However, something began to change. The ground beneath her feet, which was once compacted and firm snow, began to give way subtly, with a different, hollower creak. The sound of the sled also changed, a heavier drag, as if the snow was stickier, denser. Anya stopped abruptly, her heart pounding in her chest. The icy air seemed to vibrate with a sense of danger. She knelt, removing a glove to feel the snow. It was wetter, heavier, and the ice beneath seemed thinner, with an irregular texture that was not that of frozen ground. A chill ran down her spine, not just from the cold, but from a terrible recognition. She was in an area of a frozen river, a stretch of the great Lena River that in some places did not freeze completely or had underground currents that thinned the ice. Her grandfather always warned about these treacherous paths, where the surface could give way without warning, swallowing sleds and hunters. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Anya pushed it back with the same ferocity with which she had faced the buffalo. The village depended on her. She looked back at the sled, at the gigantic portions of meat that represented her people's lives. The weight was immense. If the ice gave way, everything would be lost. The food, the sled, and perhaps her own life. She couldn't risk it. She needed to find a safer path, but the darkness and the intensifying blizzard, obscuring the stars and the aurora, disoriented her. The wind howled, erasing the few footprints she had left. Anya closed her eyes for an instant, seeking calm amidst the chaos. She remembered a lesson from her husband: when one path closes, look for a new one. Nature always offers a way out, if you know how to listen. She opened her eyes, scanning the darkness. To her right, in the distance, she noticed a subtle elevation in the terrain, an area that seemed higher, rockier, and therefore safer. It would be a long detour, but perhaps the only chance. Time was crucial. The cold was becoming unbearable, and with each passing minute, the village grew weaker. With a heavy sigh, Anya grabbed the sled ropes again. There was no time to hesitate. The magnitude of her choice weighed on her shoulders, but the image of her children's faces was a beacon. She needed to change direction, to bypass the danger, even if it meant an even greater effort and more hours of fighting exhaustion. The decision was made. She would not go straight ahead, risking everything. She would turn right, towards that rocky elevation, praying that the ice would hold for the detour. Each step would be a test of her faith and her strength, but Anya knew she couldn't fail. Her village's life depended on her ability to adapt, to find hope where there was only danger. She pulled, and the sled, with an agonizing creak, began to change course, entering a new and uncertain part of vast Yakutia. Anya pulled, and the sled, with an agonizing creak, began to change course, entering a new and uncertain part of vast Yakutia. The rocky elevation, which from afar seemed a promise of firm ground, revealed itself to be a labyrinth of slippery stones covered by a thin layer of ice and soft snow that hid treacherous holes. Every meter was a battle. The sled, with its colossal weight, got stuck repeatedly, requiring Anya to stop, untie the ropes, reposition the gigantic portions of meat, and pull with all her might, feeling the muscles in her back and legs burn. The wind, which once howled, now seemed to cut her skin like invisible knives, and the blizzard had turned into an impenetrable white curtain, erasing any trace of a path. In the village, the fire in Mikhail and Lena's tent was almost extinguished, and the little remaining charcoal was guarded with silent desperation. Lena, with her 6 winters, coughed softly in her sleep, a sound that pained Mikhail's heart. He covered her with the last piece of reindeer hide, feeling the sting of cold in his own fingers. The murmurs of the other villagers, who once spoke of Anya's madness, now turned into a heavy silence, a resignation that Mikhail found even more terrifying. Old Yana, sitting near the entrance, her eyes almost closed, felt Mikhail's despair. She reached out her wrinkled hand and touched his shoulder. "Your mother is the spirit of winter, my young one," she whispered, her voice laden with ancient wisdom. "She bends the wind to her will. Have faith." Mikhail pressed his lips together, wanting to believe, but the hunger in his stomach was a cruel reminder of his mother's absence. Far away, Anya felt a weariness that seemed to gnaw at her bones. With each pull, a wave of nausea washed over her and her head throbbed. She stumbled on a hidden rock, falling to her knees in the snow. The sled, for an instant, seemed an unbearable burden, and a warm tear ran down her frozen face, freezing on her skin. It was a moment of weakness, a whisper of doubt that threatened to break her resolve. She closed her eyes, and for an instant saw her husband's face, strong and smiling, and then the pale faces of Mikhail and Lena. They couldn't wait. She couldn't fail. That detour, though safer, was a test of her very soul. With a groan of effort, Anya stood up, wiping the snow from her face. Her fingers, though numb, gripped the ropes with a new ferocity. She remembered her grandfather's stories about the spirits of Yakutia, who tested the hearts of the bravest hunters. She wasn't just fighting against the ice and snow, she was fighting against hopelessness itself. Each step forward was a prayer, an affirmation of life. She wasn't just a woman, a widow, she was the embodiment of her people's resilience. With the aurora borealis beginning to dissipate in the sky, giving way to a pale dawn, Anya saw a glimmer of light. It wasn't the sun, but the promise that the path, however arduous, had an end. She pulled again, and the sled, with a creak that seemed to echo her own pain and hope, continued to move inch by inch towards the uncertain future, but now, once again, illuminated by her unwavering will. Anya pulled, and the sled, with an agonizing creak, continued to move inch by inch towards the uncertain future, but now, once again, illuminated by her unwavering will. The pale dawn, which once promised a glimmer of light, revealed itself to be a grey veil that only accentuated the desolation of the landscape. The rocky elevation, far from being a refuge, was a torment. Every stone, every depression hidden beneath the soft snow was a trap. The sled, with its overwhelming weight, got stuck with exhausting frequency. Anya stopped, took a deep breath, feeling the icy air burn her lungs, and then, with an effort that seemed to tear the soul from her body, untied the ropes, repositioned the gigantic portions of meat, and pulled again. The muscles in her back and legs screamed in protest, a searing pain that spread through every fiber. The wind, relentless, whipped her face, and the blizzard, though thinner, still obscured the horizon, transforming the world into a grey and white blur. Anya's hands were numb, her fingers swollen and cracked, even beneath her fur gloves. She felt the skin of her face pulled tight, frozen by dry tears and the dampness of sweat. A dry, hoarse cough escaped her lips, and she tasted the metallic tang of blood in her mouth. Exhaustion was a constant presence, an invisible weight that threatened to crush her with every step. For an instant, she closed her eyes, and the image of Mikhail and Lena, with their pale faces and hungry eyes, appeared in her mind, a beacon amidst the darkness of her despair. In the village, the fire in Mikhail and Lena's tent was now just dying embers, and the cold penetrated the hides that served as walls. Lena coughed more frequently, a weak sound that squeezed Mikhail's heart. He hugged her, trying to transmit the little warmth left in his body. The other villagers, sitting in silence in their tents, felt the weight of waiting. Hope, which Yana had tried to rekindle, was now an almost extinguished ember. The old elder, with her clouded eyes, murmured ancient prayers, her wrinkled hands clutching a bone amulet. She felt Mikhail's anguish, the silent fear that consumed him. "She is fighting, my young one," Yana said, her voice a weak whisper. "Your mother is the spirit of the earth. She will not abandon us." But even her words seemed to lose their strength in the face of cruel reality. Far away, Anya felt the sled get stuck in a deep crevice between two rocks. She pulled with all her might, but it wouldn't move. Despair threatened to swallow her. She knelt in the snow, her head bowed, her body trembling uncontrollably. It was too much. The weight of the village, the promise she had made to herself, the pain of losing her husband, all converged into a silent cry of anguish. A warm tear, laden with frustration and sadness, ran down her face, freezing instantly. She was no longer Anya, the hunter, the protector. She was just an exhausted woman, alone in the unforgiving vastness of Yakutia. But then, a thought. A whisper from her husband resonated in her mind. "Anya, strength is not just in muscles, but in the stubbornness of the heart." She raised her head, her eyes fixed on the grey horizon. She couldn't give up. Her children, her village, depended on her. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold invade her lungs, but also a new wave of determination. She wasn't stubborn out of pride, but out of love. With a groan of effort, she stood up, her knees protesting. She untied the sled ropes, but this time, instead of pulling, she began to push the portions of meat out of the crevice, one by one, using her own body weight to leverage them. It was a slow and agonizing process, but it worked. When the last portion was freed, Anya felt a momentary relief. She retied the ropes. her fingers almost frozen. The sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a pale golden glow over the snow. It was a sign, a small miracle. She looked at the sled, now back on flatter ground, and at the path ahead, which seemed a little less treacherous. The village was still far, but the sunlight brought new hope. Anya grabbed the ropes, feeling the ancestral strength of her people flow through her veins again. She wasn't alone. She carried her husband's spirit, the love for her children, and the promise of a future. Each pull was a prayer, each step an affirmation that the impossible could be overcome. She was the bridge between hunger and abundance, between despair and renewal. And with each pull, she rewrote not only her own story, but that of all her suffering people, with the sunlight guiding her way. The sunlight, which had finally broken through the clouds at the end of the rocky path, was more than a guide. It was a warm embrace for Anya's exhausted soul. Though still pale and filtered by the snow dust in the air, its presence dispelled the fog of despair that threatened to engulf her. Each golden ray that touched the snow seemed to infuse a new and faint energy into her numb limbs. The terrain, though still rugged, became marginally less treacherous. The rocks were no longer as frequent, and the soft snow gave way to more compacted stretches, allowing the sled to glide with a little more fluidity, even if every meter required superhuman effort. Anya pulled, her muscles burning, but the pain was now accompanied by a sense of renewed purpose. She thought of her husband, of how he always said that light, however small, would always find a way. In the village, the same pale sun peeked through the tent openings, painting the villagers' faces with a faint, welcome glow. In Mikhail and Lena's tent, the dying embers of the fire seemed to gain new life with the incoming light. Mikhail, who watched over his sister, felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. Lena, in her restless sleep, stopped coughing for an instant, and her face, though still pale, seemed less tense under the golden touch of dawn. Oljana, with her almost blind eyes, felt the change in the air, the promise that the light brought. "She is returning, my young one," she whispered to Mikhail, her voice now firmer, laden with unwavering conviction. "The sun is the sign of the ancestors. Your mother is bringing life back to us." Mikhail looked at the sky, at the sun that now shone with a little more intensity, and a tear of hope ran down his face. He believed. Far away, Anya felt a shiver, not from cold, but from a premonition. The village was closer, she could feel it. The scent of smoke, faint and almost imperceptible, drifted towards her, mingling with the icy air. It was the smell of home, the smell of her people. Her cracked lips curved into a tired smile. Exhaustion was still a constant companion, but hopelessness had been replaced by an iron determination. Each pull was now a step towards salvation, a silent cry of victory against adversity. She wasn't just a woman dragging a burden. She was the embodiment of the will to survive, the guardian of a future. The ropes burned her hands, but she barely felt the pain. Her eyes, once clouded with weariness, now shone with an intense light, reflecting the sun rising on the horizon. She remembered her grandfather, who said that ancient hunters, when lost, should look to the sun and to the north, and the land would show them the way. And there it was, ahead of her, a faint line of trees she recognized. It was the edge of the forest that surrounded the village. The sight gave her new breath, a burst of energy that seemed to come from an inexhaustible source. With a muffled cry of effort, Anya pulled with all the strength she had left, feeling the sled gain momentum, sliding over the more compacted snow. The village was there, just beyond those trees. The promise of food, of warmth, of safety for her children was a magnet that pulled her forward with overwhelming urgency. She wasn't just dragging meat, she was dragging proof that unconditional love and resilience could conquer the cruelest winter, the deepest grief. With her heart pounding in her chest, a melody of hope and exhaustion, she continued, every muscle protesting, but every fiber of her being driven by an unwavering faith in her people's future. The scent of smoke grew stronger, and Anya felt the familiar vibrations of the frozen ground, a sign that she was treading on firmer soil near the village's known trails. The trees thickened, offering brief shelter from the biting wind, and then, through a clearing, she saw it. The silhouettes of the tents, small and fragile against the white vastness, and the faint glow of the fires, now more visible. It was the village. It was home. An overwhelming wave of emotion hit her, as potent as the cold, but infinitely warmer. Tears of relief and gratitude streamed down her face, mixing with frozen sweat. She was almost there, but almost was an abyss. The last part of the path, though visible, was a gentle ascent, covered by a layer of slippery ice, formed by the melting and refreezing snow. The sled, with its immense weight, seemed to challenge her with every inch. Her feet slipped, and her already aching knees threatened to give way. With each pull, a silent scream from her body echoed in her mind. In the village, one of the young hunters, young Boris, who was on watch near the forest entrance, rubbed his eyes in disbelief. He had been one of those who doubted Anya, one of those who murmured about the madness of a woman challenging the ice buffalo. But now, a small, bent figure emerged from the forest, dragging something colossal. He couldn't believe what he saw. His eyes widened, and a hoarse cry escaped his throat. "She's back! Anya's back! And she brought! She brought!" His cry cut through the village's silence like a knife. The tents opened, and the villagers, pale and hungry, emerged, their eyes fixed on the sight unfolding at the forest's edge. Mikhail, holding Lena in his arms, ran out of the tent, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. Old Yana, leaning on a staff, also shuffled out, her almost blind eyes trying to discern the distant figure. A collective murmur spread, a mixture of awe and reverence. They saw Anya, staggering, her shoulders bowed under the final effort, but unwavering. They saw the sled, and on it, the unmistakable silhouette of the ice buffalo, a mountain of meat and hope. Anya felt the gazes, the voices. They saw her. The responsibility, which was once a burden, now transformed into an even greater driving force. She couldn't fall, not now, not when salvation was so close. Her lungs burned, and each breath was an agony. The ice beneath her feet was treacherous, and the sled seemed to have fused to the ground. She closed her eyes for an instant, searching within for the last drop of courage. Her husband's face, her children's smiles, the image of her village reborn, all of it propelled her. With a roar that seemed to come from the depths of her exhausted soul, Anya pulled, a last desperate effort, feeling every muscle in her body rebel. The sled slid a little, then another, and another. She was just a few meters from the village entrance, where the first figures began to run towards her, their faces illuminated by a hope that seemed to have returned from death. She wasn't just dragging the buffalo, she was dragging the future. Anya felt her arms fail, her knees buckle under the weight of exhaustion and immense responsibility. Every fiber of her being begged for rest, but the sight of her children's faces, of her entire village, running towards her, was an elixir more potent than any food, a strength that came from the depths of her soul. Mikhail was in front, with Lena in his arms. His eyes wide with astonishment and a pure joy Anya had never seen on their small, pale faces. Yana, with her staff, moved with surprising agility for her age, her wrinkled lips murmuring prayers of gratitude and relief. Boris and the other hunters, who once doubted and murmured about a woman's madness, now came with eyes full of reverence and a new understanding of her indomitable courage, ready to help in any way needed. The sled, with a final agonizing creak that sounded like a lament of weariness, finally slid over the imaginary line marking the village entrance, crossing the threshold between despair and the salvation she had achieved with so much sacrifice. The ice buffalo, colossal and majestic even in death, was a mountain of frozen hope, a silent testament to the impossible made real. Its massive body overshadowed Anya, who, however, was the true giant there, the heroine who had bent destiny. A collective cry of relief and admiration echoed through the tents, mingling with the sobs of some villagers who couldn't contain their emotion. It was the sound of life returning, of hunger being banished forever from that place. Anya released the ropes, her numb fingers barely feeling the relief that spread through her arms. She staggered, the world spinning around her in a blur of faces and snow, feeling her body give way. Mikhail was the first to reach her. He gently set Lena down in the snow and wrapped his mother in a tight embrace, feeling the fragility of her body, but also the unbreakable strength that had brought her there. Warm tears streamed down Anya's frozen face as she clung to her son, the warmth of his body, even so small, a balm for her exhausted soul. Lena, with her large, curious eyes, touched her mother's leg, then the sled, as if she couldn't believe the reality of that sight. Yana approached, her eyes moist, and touched Anya's face with her wrinkled hands. "You did what no man dared, my daughter," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You are the soul of Yakutia, the flame that warms us." The other villagers gathered, not to touch the buffalo, but to extend their hands to Anya, offering support and gratitude. Boris and the hunters, now filled with shame for their past doubts and deep admiration, quickly began to unload the portions of meat from the sled, their movements agile and full of new purpose. The smell of fresh meat, though still frozen, filled the air, an aroma that promised life, warmth and satiety for all. The older women were already rushing to light fires with the remaining charcoal, preparing the cauldrons for what would be the most anticipated meal of their lives. The village, which moments before was plunged into a silence of despair, now buzzed with the energy of hope and gratitude, a rebirth visible on every face. Anya, exhausted, felt her legs give way. Mikhail supported her firmly, and together, with Yana's help, they guided her to the nearest tent. There, wrapped in warm furs, she finally allowed exhaustion to completely overcome her. Her eyes closed, not for sleep, but to process the magnitude of what she had done, feeling the deep relief of having fulfilled her promise. The silence, which was once of death and hopelessness, was now of reverence and peace. The cold, which was once a relentless enemy, now seemed less biting. Warmed by the flame of hope Anya had rekindled in everyone's hearts, human connection, altruism and overcoming had triumphed over unforgiving Yakutia. The village was not just saved from hunger, it was reborn, inspired by the courage of a woman who defied destiny and rewrote her people's history, proving that the strength of love can move mountains, even the oldest ice ones. Anya, wrapped in soft, warm furs, felt the warmth of the tent fire penetrate her aching bones. It wasn't sleep, but an exhaustion so profound it seemed to have rooted itself in every fiber of her being. Her eyes, though closed, saw not darkness, but vivid images of the days of struggle, the white vastness, the treacherous ice, the challenging gaze of the ice buffalo, and finally, the faces of her children, pale and hungry, now replaced by expressions of relief and love. A faint smile touched her cracked lips. She had succeeded. The weight of responsibility, which had oppressed her for so long, finally dissipated, leaving a deep and well-deserved peace. Outside, the village buzzed with an energy not seen for months. The intoxicating smell of roasted meat filled the air, mingling with joyful voices and subdued laughter. Cauldrons steamed over the fires, and the older women with agile hands cut and prepared the buffalo meat, ensuring every piece was utilized. The men, including Boris, worked together, unloading the rest of the meat and carefully storing it in the ice cellar, their movements now filled with renewed purpose and silent respect for Anya. No one murmured about a woman's madness, only admiration filled their gazes. Mikhail and Lena, cheeks flushed from the fire's warmth and the promise of abundant food, sat near Anya, not straying from her side. Lena, with her small hand, caressed her mother's skin, as if to confirm she was real, safe there. Mikhail, with a maturity that transcended his young age, held Anya's hand, his eyes fixed on her with a devotion that spoke louder than any words. He had seen his mother's weakness, but now he saw her unwavering strength, and it would shape him forever. Old Yana entered the tent, her steps slow, but her presence imposing. She sat beside Anya, took her hands and squeezed them gently. "The spirit of Yakutia smiles upon us today, my daughter," Yana said, her voice hoarse, but laden with deep wisdom. "You not only brought food, you brought the flame back to our hearts. You reminded us of what we are capable of when love guides our steps." Anya opened her eyes, meeting Yana's, and a silent understanding passed between them. It was the connection of generations, the passing of a legacy of resilience. Soon after, the first portion of steaming meat was brought to Anya. She smelled the rich, nutritious aroma. For the first time in days, the hunger in her stomach was not pain, but a warm anticipation. She took a piece, but before bringing it to her mouth, she looked at Mikhail and Lena, who watched her with bright eyes. She broke off a piece and offered it to them first, a gesture of altruism that was the essence of her journey. Her children took the meat with reverence, savoring each bite, and Anya felt a joy that surpassed her weariness. The village, warmed not only by the fires, but by renewed hope and community spirit, celebrated in reverent silence. The feast that followed was not just a meal, it was a ritual of rebirth. The stories of Anya's journey would be told for generations, a testament that, even in the most unforgiving conditions, a woman's courage, driven by love and faith in her people, could move mountains and bring life back. Hunger had been vanquished, doubt dispelled, and human connection, stronger than ever, united everyone under Yakutia's vast and starry sky. Anya finally felt at peace, her heart filled with gratitude and the certainty that the future, though still challenging, would be faced with the unwavering strength rekindled in everyone. Anya finally felt at peace, her heart filled with gratitude and the certainty that the future, though still challenging, would be faced with the unwavering strength rekindled in everyone. The days that followed were a silent testament to the transformation. The village, once plunged into the shadow of despair, blossomed with renewed energy. Fires crackled louder, children's laughter echoed through the tents, and the constant aroma of roasted meat reminded everyone of the abundance Anya had brought. The ice buffalo, which once represented death and the impossible, was now the source of life, its body carefully stored in the ice, ensuring sustenance for many months. Anya, recovered from physical exhaustion, emerged from her tent with a new posture. She was not the hunter bent under the burden, but an upright woman, her eyes shining with a wisdom that experience had forged. Her grief for her husband, though never forgotten, had transmuted into a silent strength, a living promise that his memory would be honored through the life she saved. Mikhail and Lena, now with rosy cheeks and eyes full of vitality, did not leave her side. They were her shadow, her light, and in their tight embraces, Anya felt the fullness of her victory. The family, once threatened by hunger and loss, was more united than ever, a pillar of love and resilience. Old Yana, with her soft and wise voice, became the official storyteller of Anya's saga. At night, around the fires, her words wove the story of the woman who defied the impossible, of her indomitable courage and unconditional love. The children listened with wide eyes, absorbing every detail, and the men who once doubted now listened with respect and admiration. Boris, in particular, had become one of her most fervent supporters, always ready to help Anya with any task, his eyes reflecting the profound lesson he had learned about true strength. The village tradition, once rigid and patriarchal, began to change. The women, inspired by Anya's feat, found new voices and purposes. They did not become buffalo hunters, but their influence in community decisions grew, their opinions valued with new respect. Anya had not only saved the village from hunger, she had planted the seed of a new era, where strength was defined not only by muscles, but by tenacity of spirit and the depth of love. The winter was still long and unforgiving, but Anya's village no longer feared. They had food, warmth, and above all, they had each other. Human connection, strengthened by adversity and overcoming, was a shield against the most intense cold. Anya, looking at Yakutia's starry sky, felt her husband's presence, not as a pain, but as a blessing. He would be proud. She had fulfilled her promise, not only to her children, but to all her people. The story of Anya, the woman who hunted the ice buffalo, became a beacon of hope, an eternal reminder that, even in the depths of the most brutal winter, the human spirit, driven by love and faith, would always find a path to light. And so, life continued, richer, stronger, and more united than ever, under Yakutia's vast and inspiring sky. Months unfolded into seasons, and the harsh winter gave way to a timid spring, followed by a brief but vibrant summer, before Yakutia's icy cycle began anew. Anya's village was no longer the same. Hunger, once a constant shadow, had been banished. The abundance of the ice buffalo, carefully preserved, ensured that no one would suffer need again. But the true change was in the hearts and minds of its inhabitants. Anya, now with an unshakable serenity, watched life flourish. Her children, Mikhail and Lena, grew strong and full of laughter. Lena, curious, often followed her through the village, imitating her gestures. Mikhail, with the seriousness of a young elder, helped the hunters, but always sought his mother's advice. Her husband's memory remained, now a force that propelled her, not a pain that paralyzed her. She felt his pride in the wind, in the sunlight that caressed the tents. Old Yana, with her ancestral wisdom, became the official guardian of Anya's story. Around the fires, on long winter nights, her words wove the saga of the woman who defied the impossible. The children, sitting in a circle, listened with wide eyes, absorbing Anya's courage and altruism. The men, including Boris, who once doubted, now listened with deep respect, their heads bowed in admiration. Boris, in particular, became a pillar of support for Anya, always the first to offer help, his eyes reflecting the lesson about true strength. The village tradition, once so rigid, began to soften, not by imposition, but by natural evolution. The women, inspired by Anya's feat, found their own voices. They did not wield bows and spears, but their opinions in community decisions gained a weight and respect that did not exist before. In council meetings, the men listened attentively, recognizing the wisdom and insight that the women brought. Anya had not only saved the village from hunger, she had planted the seed of a new era where strength was defined not only by muscles, but by tenacity of spirit, the depth of love, and the ability to overcome what seemed impossible. The winter was still long and unforgiving, but Anya's village no longer feared. They had food, warmth, and above all, they had each other. Human connection, strengthened by adversity and overcoming, was a shield against the most intense cold. Fires crackled louder, children's laughter echoed through the tents, and the constant aroma of roasted meat reminded everyone of the abundance Anya had brought. Looking up at the starry sky, Anya felt her husband's presence, not as pain, but as a silent blessing. He would be proud. Her promise had been fulfilled, not only to her children, but to all her people. The story of Anya, the woman who hunted the ice buffalo, became a beacon of hope, an eternal reminder that, even in the most brutal winter, the human spirit, driven by love and faith, would always find the light. Life continued, richer, stronger, and united under Yakutia's vast sky, a living testament to a woman's courage and the unwavering power of community.